Welcome to the Get Published podcast, sponsored by Brodie Consulting Group. To get more information about our coaching, publishing, executive ghostwriting, and podcast production services, go to getpublishedpodcast.com. Hello, I am Paul Brodie, and thank you for joining us for another episode of the Get Published podcast, where we help authors get published with a proven system that works. Today, we're being joined by Larry Gaydos, author of Betrayal. Larry, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much for having me.
It is a pleasure, Larry. Are you ready to get started?
Sure, let's do it.
All right. Question number one. What is the one piece of advice that you would give to a first-time author who is currently writing their book?
Okay, and I'm going to be a little specific on this because, as you know, my book is really nonfiction. So I would really address this to nonfiction writers, and I would say that it's very important to make sure and double-check all of your factual representations. Make sure you have documentation to support those factual representations, and make sure you maintain and preserve all files that contain that documentation.
I think that's great advice, especially coming from an experienced lawyer like yourself, Larry.
Yeah, most of my writing in the past has been legal writing, with the audience being legal professionals. So this was my real first endeavor into a non-legal audience. But I think that that when you write a book that has any kind of controversial message in it, that you have to really make sure that you have it well documented.
Well, one thing that I thought that was so unique with your book was the fact that you hand wrote the entire book over a year on countless legal pads, if I'm not mistaken.
Well, actually, yeah, I am very low tech. I am 68 years old, and I never really took a typing course. So I'm a hunt and peck typer. Though I was in the Corps of Engineers, and I have an engineering background. So this entire book was actually handwritten, and all of the revisions were handwritten on 8-column accounting graph paper. So the printing is very, very small, and my poor secretaries that typed this, I think, have excellent vision in order to be able to do what they accomplished.
Well, in your book, too, you mentioned that it was a very political book. I'm going to go ahead and read the subtitle, and that was, of course, the title, Betrayal, subtitle, Obama's Corrupt Legacy of Lies, Deceit, Guns, and Murder. So when you're talking about it's a controversial subject, you were not kidding with that.
Yeah, the title sounds more controversial than maybe it is, although the reason I say it's not that controversial is because of what I said previously, that everything in there is documented. Mm-hmm. This is not really an opinion piece. It's not something where I had a political motivation or a political persuasion that I was trying to advance. I really was trying to report on a case that I personally was involved in that really changed a lot of my views about politics, to tell you the truth. It's about Fast and Furious, the operation during the Obama administration where they allowed over 2,000 assault weapons to go to the Sinaloa cartel. And I had the privilege of representing my co-author, who was the main gun dealer, the federal licensed firearms dealer in the Phoenix, Arizona area, who they chose to recruit for the sales, or the majority of the sales, of the guns that went to the cartels in Fast and Furious. Of course, they told him that they were all going to be interdicted, and they never told him, in fact, they lied to him and said that the guns were never going to Mexico. But in the end, at the end of the day, we found out that they did. and that's a big part of what the book's about.
Well, and also your story was featured. Your story and Andre's story in particular were featured on Fox Nation. So when they did this show, I remember earlier in the year, it's quite the story to say the least.
It's a very interesting chapter in our history, and in particularly in the Obama administration. It was featured on Fox Nation, as you say. It aired in February of this year. The moderator was Katie Pavlich, who herself wrote a book in 2012 about Fast and Furious. It contains a lot of great detail, including a very good reproduction of an important event relating to the case, which was the murder of the border agent Brian Terry. At the very end of Fast and Furious, the operation ended because a U.S. border agent was murdered in Arizona, and the guns that were seized from the crime scene were guns that were sold from my client's store in Fast and Furious. They were sold under the direction of the ATF and DOJ. They were surveilled by ATF and DOJ. They had surveillance cameras in my client's store. And when, up until the time that Brian Terry was murdered, there were many murders in Mexico, but the Obama administration let the operation go forward because the victims were all just Mexicans. And there were at least over 300 documented murders of Mexicans up to that point. But when the border agent was killed, then Congress got involved, and there was a huge congressional investigation, the Department of Justice Inspector General investigation, and I represented my client in both of those investigations.
So you had quite the story to share. You did multiple revisions to the book over roughly a 1-year span, and then everything got done, got everything transcribed over. Now we've got the publishing process. So what did you feel was the hardest part about the publishing process, about getting the book published?
The hardest part about getting it published was getting it finished. I did 16 revisions, and what I would say to potential authors is that especially if you're a type A personality, at some point you have to say, I've revised this enough. And then you have to find a publisher, which that's another difficult task, especially if by definition the title of your book is somewhat controversial. And luckily I was lucky enough to find you, and you were willing to work with us and get it published and marketed.
Well, and I think that's the one thing. Everyone has a story to share, and no matter what spectrum you're on, if you've got a story to share, you have to get it out there. And that's always been our philosophy with our company, is if you have a fascinating story, something you want to share with the world, you need to share it, and you need to have someone that's going to help you do that. So I was very privileged to have the opportunity to help you with that side of it, to get it published and to get it marketed. And I just remember when we were getting the book cover design too, it was such a cool cover that we came up with your concept, with the picture that you wanted, the Vera holder and President Obama, and then with the betrayal title and the color scheme and everything. I just thought it was a perfect mixture of your vision and our vision. I thought it really came together nicely.
And I couldn't be happier with the cover, and we've gotten very, very, very many compliments about it, and I think it's really been a big part of our ability to market the book.
Well, and speaking of marketing, I'd like for you to please share a marketing strategy that you have used in your book launch that has worked well. Because I remember, in addition to the things that we did with utilizing different promo companies, you had some very unique strategies when you were in Aruba, and some of the different things that you did to market the book, and in particular the paperback and the hardcover versions.
Yes, I've had I go to Aruba 3 times a year, and I spend quite a bit of time there. And Aruba has a very high percentage, maybe the highest of any place in the world, of repeat visitors. So we see the same people every year, and we've been going for 20 years. And they're from all over the United States and Canada. So my strategy was to keep them apprised of the progress of the book. I had bookmarks made up in advance and passed them out to them. I got them involved in looking forward to the February broadcast on Fox Nation, which came out prior to the time the book was published. And I had them lined up because I think an important strategy is to get as broad a geographic base pre-organized, get them to anticipate the launch date, and then encourage them to write reviews and to purchase the book as soon as it comes out, because part of marketing strategy, which you advised us through, is it's important to get a lot of early purchases by people that are enthusiastic about reading your book and get them to write favorable reviews so that you can get some momentum in the marketing process at the earliest possible date.
I agree completely. And one of the things with getting that momentum too, and I know with your book in particular, one thing I emphasized was we have to get as many reviews as possible and hopefully have as many positive ones, because no matter what area you're going to cover, whether you're on the left, whether you're on the right, you're always going to offend someone with the political book. It's just human nature. It's part of it. And I remember that you guys got a couple of what I considered very unfair reviews. And fortunately, it was 2 reviews, and we were lucky to be able to get both of them removed because they weren't fair, they weren't right, and it was very politically motivated. And at least with Amazon, to their credit, which they rarely do, they did remove both of those reviews. So I thought that was really good.
I think that was an important point, and you had warned us that especially the nature of our book, we could anticipate getting negative trolls, which we got a few of those, who obviously had never read the book. Mm-hmm. And then we advised you, and you worked with Amazon, and you managed to get those negative reviews removed, which I appreciate.
Well, one of the things, too, was both of those reviews were not verified purchases. And that's one thing for our listeners to know, too. If you do get a negative review of your book, and if you feel that it's truly not fair, and if you question even if they bought the book, you can look on the actual review. And if it does not say verified review, then you do have a point of contention where you can go to Amazon and go, hey, I don't believe this person even downloaded my book. I would like to potentially have this removed. Now, it's rare that Amazon will remove a bad review, but we were very fortunate to get both of those reviews taken off because it was very clear that it wasn't accurate. And at least Amazon's credit, they did the right thing. But that's another thing I want to advise our listeners, too. If you are writing about something that could be considered controversial, you do have to prepare for that in mind because, as you say, there are trolls out there and there's people that just... they're going to leave negative reviews. It's just part of the process. But it's a rare thing, but it's always to be good to be prepared for those contingencies.
Absolutely.
Well, let's talk about your favorite book. So, Larry, what is your favorite book, and what was the number one thing that you learned from it?
Okay. Well, I'm going to give you 2 books, if that's okay.
Yeah.
So I went to West Point. I'm a West Point graduate. I served 13 years in the military. And my personal hero from West Point is Douglas MacArthur. Then I went to law school at University of Virginia Law School. And my hero from that experience is Thomas Jefferson. And so for 40 years on my desk when I was in the military and the 30-some years I was in a big law firm in Dallas, and currently when I'm in my current law firm with my daughter, I have a bust on the right side of Douglas MacArthur and on my desk on the left side of Thomas Jefferson. And these are actually crushed pecan busts that I got 40 years ago at a tobacco store in Charlottesville, Virginia. So my 2 favorite books, first is American Caesar by William Manchester, which is a very, very detailed biography of the life of General Douglas MacArthur. It's a great book. He, in my view, was a true American hero. But it's a book that is kind of timeless, especially nowadays, because there are actually a lot of parallels that Manchester draws between. He doesn't draw the parallel, but as he describes MacArthur, the reader can draw the parallels with Donald Trump. Neither of them were perfect. They were polarizing personalities. A lot of people loved him. A lot of people hated him. But no one could deny that he had extraordinary energy. He was a historic figure who accomplished a lot of things by being very bold and decisive. Thomas Jefferson, there's a recent book, Thomas Jefferson and the Tripoli Pirates. It was written by Brian Kilmeade, who Fox listeners will identify as someone who writes a lot of historical books. And this one in particular, I thought was very, very intriguing, even if you were not someone who admired Thomas Jefferson before you read the book. Because Thomas Jefferson was a pacifist, but he actually was the person who won the very first war that America ever had overseas, and that was the battle against the Tripoli pirates, which were four huge countries that attacked naval vessels, took prisoners, and held them for ransom. Thomas Jefferson's actions actually led to him establishing the United States Marine Corps, our Navy as it grew into being an actual Navy, and then coincidentally, the connection between MacArthur and Jefferson is that Thomas Jefferson, as a pacifist, actually is the one who founded West Point in 1802. And so the thing that I got from both of them and both books is to have the courage of your convictions, to have the confidence to act in accordance with your beliefs, even if there's controversy, resistance, criticism, or even adversity. Have the courage of your convictions. And that's the message that I personally have taken from both books. And that's kind of a message that I've tried to live my life by.
And for our final question, what is your favorite quote and why?
Okay, again, I have two quotes. One is a Douglas MacArthur quote. It says, he gave this in his final speech at West Point to the Corps of Cadets. It's the last speech he ever delivered after he had retired. And one of the passages of that speech is duty, honor, country. Those three hallowed words reverently dictate what you ought to be, what you can be, what you will be. They are your rallying points to build courage when courage seems to fail, to regain faith when there seems to be little cause for faith, to create hope when hope becomes forlorn. The second quote is from the West Point Cadet Prayer. And this is a passage that we read. It's just a passage from the entire cadet prayer, but we read the entire cadet prayer at Thanksgiving, family Thanksgivings, every single year. The passage that's most meaningful to me is, make us to choose the harder right instead of the easier wrong, and never be content with a half-truth when the whole can be won. So honor and duty and professionalism and ethics have always been a big part of my life and my practice, both in the military and in my civilian practice, doing white-collar criminal defense and antitrust. And so those are really guiding principles that not just have modeled my career, but hopefully have been models in my private life.
Well, Larry, I want to thank you for being a guest on the show. What is the best way for people to find you online?
Okay, the best way to get me online, we have a website. It's Gaydos Duffer PC, Gaydos Duffer PC. That's the law firm I have with my daughter. We have a very good website there. In terms of the books, obviously, you go to Amazon.com, and when you get to the first page, just put in the words betrayal and Obama, and our book will be the very first thing that pops up on your screen.
The power of the keywords. Well, Larry, I want to thank you once again for being on the show, and I wish you all the best in your author journey ahead.
Thank you very much, Paul.
Thanks again for joining us today. To learn more about how you can be featured in our brand new Get Published business book, go to getpublishedpodcast.com.